Hello and thank you for joining us at Coalesce. My name is Daniel Avancini and I'm co-founder and chief data officer at Indicium. We are a data company in Brazil focusing on assisting business to transform data into actionable insights and opportunities. And I'll be the host of this session. The title of this session is Finding Common Ground to Build Common Ground, DBT at the Enterprise. And I'll be joined by Coco Haury, Senior Data Quality Engineer at WEX, Alicia Lister, Lead Data Analyst at WEX, and Rizwan Stik, Data Engineer at WEX. So some fun facts about our speakers. Coco is a queer writer and data engineer who runs a local main LGBTQ IA plus roller skate community. Alicia is an advocate for testing, automation, and remediating manual processes, whatever possible. And she finds joy in educating and empowering new data users. When Rizwan is not working, you can find him watching soccer, playing video games, and listening to podcasts. Before we jump into things, some recommendations for making the best out of this session. All chat conversations is taking place in the Coalesce Finding Common Ground channel of DBT Slack. If you're not part of the chat, you have time to join right now and visit getdbt.com/community and search for /Coalesce Finding Common Ground when you enter the space. We encourage you to ask other attendees questions, make comments, or react at any point in the channel. After the session, the speakers will be available on the Slack channel to answer your questions. However, we encourage you to ask questions at any point during your session. I've had the experience of implementing DBT in a few enterprise companies myself, and I'm very much interested in the experience they will share with us. So let's get started. Over to you, Coco, Alicia, and Rizwan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Daniel, for what a great introduction. I really appreciate your time and you hosting this session for us today. So thank you. So I'm Coco. Nice to meet you, everyone. Let's get started with our talk, Finding Common Ground to Build Common Ground, DBT at the Enterprise. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a few different things. So let's look at our agenda. Logistics, as Daniel already really went over, I just wanted to add, if you throw a question into Slack during the talk, we do have a Q&A time later where we will be selecting 2 to 3 top questions that we'd love to answer during this session. So please feel free to throw your questions in our Slack. And yeah, we'd love to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what our team does, what WEX Incorporated does. We're going to look at what problems are we solving and what challenges do we have with data at the enterprise level. And then we're going to talk to some experts who actually work with this data every day and who work in DBT every day and have for several years now. And then we're going to have, that Q&A time that we talked about. We'll select 2 to 3 top questions related to, data at the enterprise level and DBT at the enterprise level, and related to the tools and technology that we're going to cover here today. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. So a little bit about us. Thank you, Daniel. I was a senior data quality engineer. I had the opportunity this summer to become a data engineer and get my hands dirty with more analytics engineering. So just wanted to share a couple pictures of us here. And thank you again, Daniel, for your great introduction. All right. So what does WEX do? Because the name doesn't really tell you although it is, catchy, and it's a cool logo. I think we just revamped it. So yeah, WEX is a company. We're essentially a payments company. Started in fleet payments back in the early 1980s. You can read more about our history online in detail. And that was a lot of, trucking companies and large fleets. And so we would partner with gas station companies, and then we would partner with trucking fleets and create that business payments relationship between those two, types of companies. And so we expanded over time and included travel. So that was great. To, over acquisitions, you can again see the detailed history. And we also recently, in recent years, have health as well. So different business to business payments processing across several different sectors and several different, types of data processing, as you would imagine, from, you know, uh, both sides, right? From the gas station partner perspective, from the fleet perspective. So WEX is a company, that's what we do. And as you would imagine, data is very important for reports, for making those business decisions, and just for seeing how the business is doing. What do the transactions, the payments, the exchanges look like? So a lot of different data. So what are some of those challenges? Let's, kind of dive in and take a look at what does WEX deal with, and maybe you've actually seen, some of these challenges at your enterprise, or maybe, any business really, maybe just transactions or payments, but any kind of that data. So different challenges, right? A lot of different challenges. Let's just kind of go through our list here. From a database perspective, there's all different types of data, especially through our acquisitions. And an acquisition is a great way to grow your business, but that other business has already been treating their data in a certain way. And you're running your business in another way. Maybe they have their data on Oracle and you're on Redshift. How do you bring those different technologies together in a smooth way, in a way that will scale for the future, in a way that will grow the company as intended when the acquisition occurred? So at that top level, executives are thinking, yes, about how acquiring that other company can make us more money as a business. But they're also thinking, but they're not thinking about, sorry, they're not thinking about how hard is it to integrate, Oracle and Redshift and SQL Server and bring all of these technologies together. And if you've worked at an enterprise level, or you've worked at a company that's been acquired, or you've acquired a company, you know that even integrating email and chat can be really difficult, let alone integrating data to make those critical business decisions and to make that acquisition profitable. So that's a big challenge. From a data perspective, things are treated differently, right? So when you have a fleet payment, that's going to be a trucker perhaps with his special WEX card that he can swipe, at a series of gas stations, and that's his business card for getting that gas for his truck. That's going to be different from an executive who might use a WEX card to book a business flight or book a business hotel. And so those are going to have to be treated differently just from a transaction perspective. A gas station is just one product, or a gasoline card, pardon me, is one product. It's gas. But, travel, that could be a plane, that could be a hotel. And what are the different implications that come with those? Health, again. And we're not even talking about compliance here, right? There are rules that govern payments in all of these different sectors as well. So I hope you're starting to kind of see all of the different layers of challenges with data at this scale. So interpretation perspective. I mean, this could be two people just talking about data, let alone two businesses trying to, merge their data together and make it make sense for them. So, a business unit interprets an account in a certain way, right? But then another business unit, let's say I have North America fleets, but then I also have European transactions. Those are going to be governed from possibly different interpretations and account perspectives. And so, what does an account mean when I talk to someone who, sells WEX business partnerships in Europe versus someone who sells a WEX business partnership in the United States? What does an account look like? What does in an acquisition an account look like? If I acquire another company, what does their partnership, hierarchy look like, and how can we bring those together? And that really, things like that can be an ongoing conversation. So, how do you treat? I could get into it. How do you treat the gas station, and how do you treat the trucking company, and how are you handling both of those business partnerships in your data in order to report and track the revenue on each of them? And last but not least, and honestly, really not last, there are so many different data challenges that I know many of you have seen on a regular basis. We see it every day. So these are just a few, even though I'm, detailing a bit in each of them. But yeah, so our last one, architecture perspective. So, again, it's almost in that interpretation sense, but it's also that database sense, right? Maybe I have two different tables. I'm a business that was just acquired, and I have two different tables that manage my accounts. Maybe I have, account address and I have account transaction, just as a very, very basic example. And I don't want to record my customer's address every time there's a transaction necessarily, because that's going to just be an extraneous column. That's not efficient, right? So maybe I want to have that address table separately. But then let's say I get acquired, and this new enterprise, they do have those together. Every time a transaction occurs, they take down, the address, and maybe they've done that since the 1980s, perhaps. And that's just kind of how it is. And so, how do you bring in that newer acquisition, that company that uses two tables to architect those transactions and join on that, account address table versus an enterprise that perhaps does, have a legacy behavior that records it differently and has a different architecture? And so, how do you bring those things together? And sometimes, honestly, that can be just department to department, right? It doesn't even have to be acquisition related. Maybe sales and Salesforce, they're going to treat leads and they're going to treat new credit card applications differently from risk analytics, who's going to be not necessarily interested in new accounts and making new accounts, but in looking at, the lifetime of the accounts we already have and finding out what are the risks involved in terms of an account charging off, in terms of fraud. There's a lot of different perspectives on an account, and just what the marketing perspective, the sales perspective, the risk perspective, the reports perspective. So all of that, as you all know, you can, when you're going in to look at data, you want to interpret that data. And so everyone's architecting their interpretation differently. So hopefully you're not too overwhelmed. Thankfully, as I said, this also gives us years of work to do. So let's take a look at how we solve some of these overwhelming problems now that we've seen the flood of data interpretation and technical and architecture techniques that we've come across. So yeah, I'm just going to go through our brief tech stack really quickly, and then I'd love to bring in Rizwan and Alicia to talk to us about how DBT has helped us solve some of these challenges and made them just a little bit easier to deal with at enterprise scale. So yeah, for ingest, just a few of our modern tech stack that we're working in. We're transforming from Redshift over the last couple of years into Snowflake, and bringing everything in as data mart by business unit. So some of those other pieces of data we were talking about earlier, marketing, support, maybe in the call center, sales, those are all going to be different, marts essentially, and they're going to use their data differently. So we've begun to divide within the enterprise by mart. Airflow is our execution technology. We are in DBT CLI. I did want to point that out. I know DBT Cloud is on the way to PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance, but health data, payments data is governed by these laws. So we do need to control some of that a little bit more, and DBT CLI gives us that capability. And then we have a controlled mono repo, and that's where we have all of our different marts. So it's our little tech stack. All right. So I would love to bring in Alicia and Rizwan now, and get their expertise on how they have seen DBT transform what we do at WEX over the last couple of years here. So yeah, Rizwan, I'm going to ask you first. How has DBT, helped WEX create a modern data platform from what you've seen?
Yeah, thanks for getting into the deep dive, Coco. So yeah, so from how has DBT helped WEX create a modern data platform? Like from all the data perspective issues that you mentioned earlier, like what DBT has helped us provide was give us a suite of packages that we can use. For example, the use of macros, which are very versatile and major and which are currently being majorly used within our work to replace repetitive code, and to have helper scripts and Ginger templates to build out custom aliases or have masking policies, and all of that has helped us streamline and have redundant code out of our monorepo, because having a monorepo in itself is a challenge, because if you have to change something, it has to go through a million different places. So in that sense, DBT provides references which can be used to, instead of the redundant code. So in case there's a change in the future that needs to be implemented, you can only go and change it at the parent reference, and everything trickles down to wherever that gets referenced. So that has been a great help. Like from a data engineer perspective, we don't have to go through do and like a million changes, just changing the name of a table or changing the name of the column as such. And then on top of that, as you mentioned about PCI data, compliance, HIPAA data, like we need a lot of masking policies when it comes to releasing data to the end users. And DBT has provided us with those. We can enable masking policies directly. We can have a macro for masking policies as we do. And then you can simply implement them within your YAML files, and then have those masking policies applied whenever and wherever necessary, depending on which sort of data you use, right? And a couple of other things are like the use of snapshots. DBT helps us to create snapshots, have dimensional snapshots in different cases. Like there might be multiple cases where the data gets purged from the source, Oracle sources or SQL servers and all. So it helps us, gives us the capability to have that dimensional snapshotting enabled. So it's sort of a whole package together, where we don't have to look outside of what we have to implement like any certain solution that we think should be apt in our cases. And on top of that, like trusting the data, right? When it comes to data analytics, data engineers, data scientists, analysts, everybody has to trust each other's work. That's how any data that you put out will be usable. If anybody that the downstream users don't trust our data, then they don't use it. And DBT has helped us in building that trust with our downstream users by having lineage graphs, so anybody can have and go and take a look at those lineage graphs to see where and when the data is flowing in from and what is that testing for our scenarios. And then having centralized documentation, and we as data engineers, like anybody as an engineer hates documentation. So this having centralized documentation has enabled us to have everything documented. For it's an ongoing process, but still we are, I think, ahead when it comes to documentation, because it's fun to do it this way when you know that all of the text you've written can be visualized in sort of a beautiful manner and is being used by everybody downstream to build that trust. So yeah, I'd say those are the couple of points I'd say has helped Vex to build a better platform, and DBT has helped Vex. Back to you, Coco.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Rizwan. That's fantastic to hear. And yeah, I'm actually going to pass the same question to Alicia. So, Alicia, how have you seen DBT help transform WEX in your experience as a lead data analyst? And
yeah, so for me, I see DBT that's created a universal tool for all of the data engineers and the analysts to work in. It's enabled us to start moving the analysts away from tools such as SAS and others, where the responsibility of the code maintenance was at the individual level and into a centralized repository. Using other tools, it was the responsibility of each individual to maintain their code and their data outputs in a siloed environment. Data tests were manual, one-time events at the time of writing the code, not at each run to check for any anomalies as DBT is made possible. We all want our jobs to be easy and the data to be trusted, as Rizwan alluded to. DBT makes it easy to put the test on all of the stages, from the source tables through the transformations and the final output, which creates that confidence we want in the data for both the engineers and the end users. We want the end users to use our data and know that it's accurate every time. With packages such as DBT expectations, we can test for the expected values, numeric, text, expected formats, which is powerful, particularly when using CSVs, because as we all know, humans can make typing mistakes as they send us a new monthly file. We use other tests, so at least one, not null, on individual columns, as well as referential integrity to ensure that our output remains aligned with the source system, again, making that trust. DBT enables sharing and governance of the code changes in real time. It supports working collaboratively on a project team, which all of us are a part of, and provides clarity and consistency of the naming conventions with PyTest and SQL Fluff. Back to you, Coco.
thank you so much, Alicia. Yeah, and I love that because I feel like you answered the next question a little bit. So I'm going to come back to this slide, but I did want to show our wonderful audience here that we have, and I ran this last week, and I know we've had more added since then, but I just wanted to share we have over 11,000 tests in our repository, all schema tests, by the way, from DBT expectations, DBT utils, what's built in. We have our one code base. Right now we have 5 data marts, all pretty large. As you can see, we've got over 1,000 sources, 1,900 models, and as Rizwan was saying earlier, over 600 macros, close to 700 at this point. So just wanted to share some of those numbers with you all. Thank you, Rizwan and Alicia, for sharing that. Now we're getting a little bit close to time here, so we'll do this one. And like I said, I feel like both of you kind of answered this a little bit, but I'd love to hear what's the biggest change you've noticed, in our data platform since we switched to DBT a few years ago. Sorry, Rizwan, I will I'll ask you to answer that first for us.
Thanks, Coco. The biggest change I've noticed is that the way that we do things. So it's the ease of the use in a way. Like in one short sentence, like it's very easier for us to have uh, DBT implemented and then use the references and macros. Like that's been the biggest change that I've noticed, is that like it reduces the amount of redundant effort that you put towards anything in terms of like the code changes or any new code build. Any new mart build as such is by the use of macros. We can just implement a single macro, and in more cases than not, like for example, for the data issues that we've mentioned, like each business has a different way that they call a customer. But if you have a macro to defined on how each business treats their customers, you can implement that macro downstream and you don't have to worry about it, because you know that that macro will indefinite have that right logic applied to whenever necessary. So that's one thing that helped me in the ease of usage and using references. And of course, as I've said before, documentation, having centralized docs, like that's the cherry on top. Yeah. Back to you, Coco.
Thank you, Rizwan. Yeah, and I can't stress enough also DBT docs from a quality perspective, from a data engineering perspective, from a data governance perspective, and an accountability perspective. Before I pass this to Alicia, I just wanted to share that WEX actually has our DBT docs published on an internal URL, which is really, really helpful, because we can essentially send it to anyone and no one has to generate it on their machine or download the repository. And every time we do a release, which we are on a weekly cadence right now for our repository and our projects, that documentation gets updated and goes out to everyone who needs to take a look at it. So just wanted to share that neat little bit. So yeah, Alicia, what's the biggest change that you've noticed since we switched to DBT?
Yeah, so for me, it's a couple things. The centralized data platform, removing the need to chase down the data that you need from all of the disparate sources that we have from all of our acquisitions, and just real quick, the trust. So again, having those tests that are running throughout the project. So if there's an unexpected change in the upstream data based on the severity of it, we have the ability to stop the code from making updates to the output tables, or provide a warning in the log so others can investigate before the end users are affected. As an analyst, that's important, so that you can, trust your dashboards that they're accurately updated, or that they're not pushing inaccurate data on the other side of it. Back to you, Coco.
Yeah, I agree, and we've seen a lot of that, right? With over 1,000 sources, over, what was it, 1,700 models. Let's take a look. Yeah, 1,900. Look at that. I can't think of so many. I can't even remember how many we have. But yeah. All right. Now we've got 2 minutes left. So I'm gonna take a peek. I do see one question I'd love to answer that just came up. How do we manage our macros to ensure that they're not duplicated? Thank you, Brian. That's a fantastic question. What I'm going to do is recruit our absolutely awesome, we have a core data platform team. And so I know a couple of those folks are in our chat, and I know that they're going to be able to talk more about how they manage the quality of what's merged and how they manage all of those different marts, right? Because as you would imagine, there needs to be standards across the enterprise, and standards that will work at scale. So maybe next year we can share what DBT standards we implement and how to control DBT at the enterprise level. So I'm going to hand us back to Daniel. Daniel, thank you again. And thank you so much, DBT, for having us. DBT Labs, everybody, and our presenters. Back to you, Daniel.
Thank you. So thank you guys so much for this great presentation. Coco, Alicia, Rizwan. Such a huge challenge, and it's definitely something that relates to most enterprise companies that are applying DBT. And it's somewhat different from startups and companies that have a more standard, more data, modern data stack for sure. If you guys like to join the Q&A with our speakers, it will be in Slack. So again, Coalesce Finding Common Ground channel. The hosts are there, so you can go there and talk to them. If not, the next session is how Cisco powers its modern ELT approach with Fivetran and DBT Labs, and how to leverage DBT community as the first and only data hierarchy survivor. It will be starting shortly at 10:30, so in about 15 minutes. We hope to see you there. So thanks everyone. Thanks guys. See you next time.